Tenemos el gusto de estar esta noche aquí. Primero que nada, agradecer a todo el equipo organizador de Talmud Torah, de la gente que está atrás de traer al Rab. Siempre es un gusto recibir personalidades de esta talla en esta su casa que es Mount Sinai. Antes de comenzar y presentar al Rab, yo quisiera invitar a Tamara Jalabe a que nos cuente un poco sobre lo que es este libro y cuál es el motivo de tener al Rab con nosotros. Tamara, si gustas pasar, por favor.
Good evening, everybody. We'll do this in English out of respect for the rabbi, for his beautiful wife, and his amazing daughter. I'll be very brief. This book came to my hands in 2018, and when I read it, it changed my life. It changed the perception that I had about religion, about God, my Judaism, and who I was. I've read this book, and I've done it for the high holidays for over 6 years. And 2020, when we were in COVID, a lot of friends, I invited them to the house so they could read it with me and we could do the work. And I told them that they should read it, and that's when I realized that not everybody reads English. And I thought this amazing treasure had to be translated into Spanish so everybody could do the work. So I started this journey, and it was amazing because I contacted the rabbi, his daughter, and they believed in me, and they gave me the authorization to start the project. And I was very blessed to find the most amazing team to be able to do this in 9 months. Mr. Mendoza, once again, there are no words to thank you. He's our translator, okay? No words. He did a flawless job of keeping the essence of the book. My beautiful Yael, she's somewhere here. She just got here. She's the designer, and she kept up the pace with us. I couldn't have done this without my dear Sophie, who was always there for me. My beautiful Raji, thank you so much for always having a kind word and keeping up with me. And I have to give a huge thanks to my husband, my dear James, and my beautiful, beautiful children, David and Miriam, who were there always for me when things got tough. And they said, we believe in you and you can do it. So it's an honor for having you, all of you, at this event. I really hope you enjoy it. And I think it's Mr. Ben's turn to talk. So just enjoy it, have fun, and the rabbi is just such an amazing man, so enjoy him.
Tamara, muchas gracias y muchas felicidades por este gran proyecto. Sembraste una semilla muy importante en lo que puede ser nuestra espiritualidad y religión. El rabino Simon Jacobson es nuestro invitado de esta noche. Es considerado uno de los más grandes eruditos y oradores más solicitados del mundo judío y también del no judío. El rabino es autor del exitoso libro Towards a Meaningful Life, hacia una vida con sentido, una publicación de William Morrow que ha vendido más de 400,000 copias hasta la fecha y ha traducido al hebreo, francés, español, holandés, portugués, italiano, ruso, alemán, húngaro, checo y georgiano. El rabino Jacobson dirige el Meaningful Life Center, una organización que une lo secular y lo espiritual a través de una amplia variedad de programación en vivo y en línea. Presenta a personas de todos los orígenes las enseñanzas universales de la Torá como un modelo para la vida. Durante más de 14 años, el rabino Jacobson fue responsable de la publicación de las charlas del Rebbe de Lubavitch, uno de los líderes judíos más influyentes del siglo XX. El rabino Jacobson es uno de los grandes eruditos y oradores más solicitados en el mundo judío. Ha dado conferencias a diferentes audiencias en 6 continentes y en 40 estados sobre temas psicoespirituales y la aplicación del pensamiento judío a la vida contemporánea. Su voz tiene sus raíces en las enseñanzas atemporales de la Torá, pero al mismo tiempo es profundamente actual, relevante, única y vanguardista. Ha sido entrevistado en más de 300 programas de radio y televisión, incluyendo CBS, CNN, Newsmax, PBS, MSNBC, Fox y NPR. También es presidente y editor de The Al-Heimner Journal, el periódico judío de más rápido crecimiento en Estados Unidos. Él dice: el desafío es elevar nuestra conciencia espiritual y vivir vidas de mayor significado, claridad y propósito. Este es el mensaje y la misión del rabino Simon Jacobson, un sabio y místico de una línea ininterrumpida que remonta a 90 generaciones hasta el Sinai, cuna de las 3 grandes religiones monoteístas del mundo, y nos va a compartir un plan para llevar una vida basada en esta sabiduría moral, espiritual, cabalística e histórica. Sin más preámbulos, invito al Rabbi Jacobson que pase por favor a dirigir las palabras. Bienvenido.
Gracias. It's the only word I know in Spanish. Thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you, Tamara. Where's Tamara sitting? She's already organizing? Okay. For making this happen. And for your entire team, Sophie and all the others. And I want to personally thank my dear wife who's here with us, came to New York with me, and my daughter, Rashi, from Los Angeles. So, I always like to personalize things. I don't go by a script. I'm not reading from a teleprompter, which is very popular in the United States these days. So I think I'd like to introduce myself a bit. I mean, I know I was introduced the formal invitation, but I'll do the informal one now. I was born and raised in New York City, in Brooklyn. You've heard of this town? Yeah, it's a little town northeast of the United States. I grew up, my parents are both Russian born. They came to the United States after World War II. I'm the oldest of 5 children. And so I grew up in a very, I don't like labels. They say labels are for clothing, not for souls. But if you were to give a label, I would say I grew up in a very orthodox, ultra-orthodox Hasidic Chabad home. I went to yeshiva with an intense Jewish education. But at the same time, which was maybe more unique, was I grew up in a home that was non-dogmatic, which is not so common in religious homes. Non-dogmatic, my father was a journalist. Both my parents were well-read. I would say like global citizens. So I also was exposed to a universal approach to life, which is an interesting mix because I have, of course, classmates and friends that grew up in a similar home like I did, but did not have the second half. They did have a lot of dogma. And many were, frankly, even traumatized. They call it religious trauma. I hope none of you have ever experienced that. But in my case, I only have warm memories of my childhood, of my Jewish upbringing. And yet, at the same time, my personality is naturally skeptical. I ask questions, I don't just accept what is being said. And therefore, in my own journey as a teenager, I struggled, on one hand, with a very absolute religious faith called Judaism, and at the same time, how to personalize it and make it relevant, nonconformist. Always felt myself as being a rebel without a cause, and I was looking for a cause. And that's not so simple when you're growing up in a very, as I said, didactic and you can even call rigid system of law and order and traditions. The reason I'm saying it is because it positioned me in a very interesting place when I finally began to find my calling, my soul, if you wish, and my mission in life. I saw myself at some point becoming like a bridge. On one hand, I grew up in a very intense Jewish Torah education. On the other hand, I was very well read and understood the secular world. So when I first wrote the book, Torah Meaning for Life, as was mentioned, that was my challenge. I wanted to preserve the integrity of 3,500 years of Jewish tradition, while also communicating the message in a very personal way to a secular world, which frankly, in many ways, is antithetical to religion. As we all know, there's a real battle going on between science and religion for the last few hundred years since the Enlightenment. And it wasn't so simple. But, thank God, I could say I experienced some success, and I found it to be a fascinating journey, because it's one thing when you hang around with people like yourself, like, you go to a party, do you gravitate to the people you know or to the new people that you don't know? Most people will say they like to go to the people they know, it's more comfortable. I'm from the people that like to go to the people I don't know, because the people I know, I could always talk to them other times. To get exposed to new ways of looking at things. A lot of people don't like to speak to people they disagree with. I think actually it enriches us all when we're able to talk to people who have very different perspectives. So after my book, Torah Meaning for Life, was published, I was sent on a book tour by the publisher. You all know what a book tour is? I don't know if it ever arrives in Mexico, but in the United States it was a big thing in those years, in the 90s. You travel around the country, visit bookstores, and you speak, and you sign books, and you have interviews. There was no internet yet, really, until 1994, more or less. So at that point, it was more print, radio, TV interviews. And I had some very fascinating experiences as I met here a religious guy with a beard and a yarmulke, meeting a secular world as an author of a book that was published by a secular publisher. So I just want to share one humorous story that captures one of many, which will set the tone for what I believe can be a real meaningful way to experience the period in time which we are in now, as we are entering the new month of Elul. I should have actually began with the greeting, the Happy Rosh Chodesh, but I'll share and talk about that soon some more. So this was in Cleveland, Ohio. And I was scheduled to speak at the evening at a Barnes & Noble, which is a big bookstore in Cleveland. And during the day, I did some interviews. One of them was at a what they call the Morning Drive television news show. I think it was Good Morning America, one of those, on ABC. So they interview like new authors. It's like a 6-7 minute interview. I walk into the studio, and the producer greets me, and then she introduces me to the anchor person who's gonna interview me. As soon as she saw me, the anchor woman, she suddenly became like pale and like very disturbed, and I had no idea why, and I felt like I was very uncomfortable. She was looking at me like I did something wrong. So I thought maybe I didn't eat breakfast that morning, so I didn't have any food on my face, and I was wondering what's bothering her. So I said to her, "Is everything all right?" She says, "Yeah, but I'm very shocked." That was the word she used. I was very shocked by you. I said, "By me? Why did I do anything wrong?" She said, "No, by your look. I never expected that the author of this book would look like you." That's what she said. I know it doesn't sound very complimentary, right? She says, "I love this book. It's one of my favorite books. It sits on my nightstand I read it every night. And it really has changed my life in many ways. I don't think she was even Jewish, to be honest. I think she was a secular, non-Jewish person. And I never expected the author to look like you. So I said, what did you expect? Anyway, she said, I expected a tall, clean-shaven, skinny-looking, sexy guy. That's what she said. And not one with a beard and a yarmulke. She didn't say those words, but that was the implication. So I smiled and I said to her, I thought I looked like that, you know. 2 out of the 3, 1 out of the 3, you know. Anyway, this was interesting. It wasn't the first time, because this is what happens when you're going to another world. My book doesn't have a picture of me. So you read the book and at the merit of the message without seeing the face of the author. But here, so I said, why don't we talk about that? Let's talk about that on the show. She says, I don't want to say that. I said, say it in a nice way. So I think it's a good conversation. So we sit down on the couch. The interview begins, and she says, here, Rabbi Jacobson is the author of a new book, beautiful book, Torah Meaningful Life. It's one of my favorite books. I'd like to ask you, your book is so universal, and its message really resonates with people from all walks of life, religious, not religious, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, all walks and all colors and so on. Wouldn't your message be received better if you looked like one of us? That was the way she put it. If you looked like one of us. So I said to her, this is all live TV, mind you. There was no editing. Everything's right on the spot. So I said, look, if I was a Saudi Arabian prince wearing my garments, or someone from the islands, I don't think you would ever ask that question. They would fire you for discrimination. Because I'm Jewish, you can get away with it. And I smiled. It wasn't like I wasn't offended. I just wanted to make that point. And I said, on the contrary, I'm very comfortable in my own skin. This is my dress. This is my uniform. Would I ever ask you to change your look to satisfy me? No. We are all souls, and our souls don't have colors and shapes. And we have to connect on a soul level. So maybe this is a great opportunity for us to connect on a deeper level than on superficial looks and superficial images and all that comes in our external world. And she really received that well, and the interview really went very positively. So I say it as one example of many. I have many other stories, but we have limited time. I can regale you all night. Some of them are a lot more, let's put it this way, controversial. But suffice this as an example of two worlds coming together. And the question is, can we integrate the two? Because the fact is, and I don't know all of you in this audience, but I met some of you as I was signing books. I see very many different people, different backgrounds. Some of us are Jews, some of us are not Jewish. Some of us are believers, I'm sure, and some are maybe agnostics, and some are atheists. Even though, frankly, one of my favorite stories I use in not 60 days, maybe I also write it 60 days, you'll know tomorrow better than I. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Barditchever, a great Hasidic rabbi, once met a self-proclaimed atheist, and he invited him for Rosh Hashanah to synagogue. And he said, Rabbi, I'm an unbeliever. What am I going to do in synagogue? So the rabbi said to him, the God you don't believe in, I also don't believe in. You hear that? In other words, before we say what we believe and what we don't believe, we have to first define the terms. And once you start defining the terms, you come to realize we agree about more than we think we do, and maybe we disagree about other things. So bringing these two worlds together is not a simple matter, but we live really in a secular world. I mean, even among the Jewish people, 14, 15 million, and may they always continue to grow, a big percentage would consider themselves secular, unaffiliated, assimilated, whatever term you want to use. So it's a fascinating, more than fascinating, it's also somewhat challenging how you bring these two worlds together. And especially in this season, for the Jewish people, this is the season that begins the new year. Now today, literally, is the new moon. If you go outside, you will not see a moon because the new moon never looks like anything. The new moon of the month of Elul. In Hebrew, Elul is the month that prepares us for the new year. So the new year, Rosh Hashanah, a year of a renewal, which will be followed by the next great holiday, Yom Kippur, which will then be followed by Sukkot, a holiday of celebration, and concluded with Simchat Torah, the dancing, the exuberant dancing. So it's a very serious month, a serious time of year, and for many of us, it's a challenge. I go back. I grew up with Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. It was part of my nature. It came as a given. It was just part of what we did. It was our routine. It was our tradition. But growing up and getting older, I come to realize that for many of us, the challenge is, can it be relevant? Are we just doing it mechanically, by rote, robotically? And this is one of the reasons I wrote 60 Days, maybe the primary reason. To say that a momentous time like Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur that can change your life, and then most people, or I would say almost all people, if they're honest, will say, I don't know if it really changed my life. It was a nice day. Maybe the rabbi gave a good sermon. We had some nice holiday meal, some good interactions, but last as a permanent effect. So I want to talk about that in very personal terms. The real challenge, frankly, is to take things out of the traditional structure and to turn it into a relevant blueprint that addresses our psychological, emotional, and personal lives. So maybe a good way to capture this, I'll share an anecdote that I think reflects on this, the tension and between, we'll call faith and modernity, faith and the modern world. So little Lucy comes home from school. She's been studying biology, the origin of our species. Where do we come from? And it's all very confusing. So she goes over to her mother and says to her mother, where do we come from? What's the origin of the human race? So her mother, her face breaks out in a warm smile, sits down her daughter, and says, let me tell you, I was always looking forward to this day that I could share with you that we had beautiful grandmother and grandfather that came, one from Poland, one from Czechoslovakia. Go back a few generations past, we had a great-great-grandfather who was the author of a very important work on Jewish scholarship. And the further back we go, the better it gets. All the way back to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah in the Bible, in the Torah. All the way back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Okay, beautiful. Her father comes home, Lucy's father, and she asks him the same question. Where do we come from? And in stark contrast to her mother, the father gets all very disturbed and his face turns serious. He sits down Lucy on the couch and says, I always rude, was not wanting to have this day where I have to tell you where we originate from. And he begins his explanation. He says, well, going back a few million years, we started with apes. We come from apes. Before that, amphibians out of the water. And before that, bacteria. And the farthest back we have so far figured out, a few billion years, is a ball of gas where it all started, the Big Bang. That's the roots of our species. So a pretty different answer than her mother. So she runs back to her mother and says, I'm very confused, more confused than ever. You gave me one answer. Dad, my father, our father gave me another answer. Which one is it? And the mother calmly said to her, we both told you the truth. Your father told you about his side of the family. And I told you about my side of the family. So there you have it. The reconciliation between evolution and creationism. Just a matter of which side of the family, and you can choose. And I know it's a joke, but this joke also has a lot of depth to it, because the truth is there are two perspectives on life. That one, we are random creatures that evolved from lower species by accident. In the Darwin's world, natural selection. And there is no real significance or unique about the human being. We are essentially evolved animals, whether we like it or not. That's the way it's described. This is the prevalent Western perspective on the human being. The Torah perspective is very different. You open up a Torah, the Bible, tells you immediately the description of the human being, different than all other creatures, created in the divine image, Tselem Elokim. Each of us is created with a divine soul, and very deliberate. It's not an accident, and thus each of us is indispensable, and we have a role to play that the entire world needs us. And you have a unique mission that you and only you can accomplish. Now, the consequences of these two different perspectives cannot be overstated. So many implications. I'll just give you one simple example. Think about it philosophically. Morality. Do we prosecute, for example, a predator in the wild when it kills its prey? It murders, let's take a tiger, kills a deer in cold blood. That's murder, right? Why don't we take it to court and judge it? Because we know that's its nature. It has no choice. It's the natural tendency, and it's part of the balance of nature that predator will kill prey, and so on. So why human beings who are just evolved tigers or other animals, why is it when we murder others, we consider it a crime? So I understand the answer is usually, well, if we didn't, there'd be no coexistence, we all kill each other. But why are we expecting higher standards? We're just evolved animals. So for practical reasons, we understand it, but on a higher level, when you do something wrong, should you really be judged? After all, what's the difference one bacteria or another bacteria? Do you know how many bacteria we kill every morning when we get out of bed? So theologically, there's an issue here. Are we really criminals? Is there such a thing as right and wrong? From a Torah point of view, it is absolutely, because a soul, a divine soul is expected, and has free will, and it's not like an animal in the wild. Animals, we don't prosecute because there's nothing wrong. They didn't do anything wrong. That's part of the balance of nature. Just one example. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because this is the ultimate message of Rosh Hashanah. So when I was challenged the first time, I remember, I don't know, maybe 40 years ago, 45 years ago, I was speaking to a journalist, and he was saying to me, yeah, I understand this religion is good for a few religious people, but tell me, Rosh Hashanah is coming. He's Jewish, he was Jewish, but he was secular. Rosh Hashanah is coming. Tell me, how is it relevant to me? I didn't grow up with it. It means nothing to me. My parents were both atheists, socialists as well, and they didn't care about the whole thing. Why is it relevant to me? So I shared with him exactly this story, this anecdote. I said it's relevant because Rosh Hashanah teaches us that that's the day when the human race was born. That's the day when each of us, our collective birthday happens, and it compels us to ask the question, who are you as a human being? Do you see yourself as an accidental, evolved creature, or do you see yourself as a divine ambassador to this world to illuminate and bring kindness and generosity? Are you a giver or are you a taker? And I remember, and I'm not saying this to toot my horn, I just share with you exactly what happened. He was so taken by it, he went to write an article about it. And he went for the first time to synagogue that Rosh Hashanah. I don't want to tell you the end of the story, but I have to. The end of the story is he went to the synagogue, he chose the wrong synagogue. The rabbi, instead of talking about any of these type of messages, instead got into politics and began yelling at all the congregants why they only come once a year. So it wasn't exactly a spiritual experience. And I had to work a lot of damage control after that. But today, this man is an observant Torah Jew with a family, and we're friends, and I remember it, and he remembers. But this was a perfect example. He had no clue what Rosh Hashanah was and its relevance to our lives. So I didn't judge him, obviously. I just shared with him a thought. And I can go on with many, many examples. I will give a few more. The point being is that some of the most revolutionary ideas, and may I say, in psychology and in sociology and human relationships, and even in therapy and recovery, actually originate from the original Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot experiences. I know that may surprise some of you. But the fact of the matter is that if you do a little research, the values of the Western world that we cherish so much, the secular world cherishes, where do you think it originated from? And I'm not trying to pull rank, but you can look it up. There was years ago, you may remember a book called The Gifts of the Jews by Thomas Cahill. It was a best-selling book by a non-Jewish writer, and he wrote 30 concepts and words in the English language, or general language, that the Jewish people contributed to the world. You won't believe what words they are. Words like trust, like generosity, gratitude, providence, faith. I mean, words that we today cherish as being the values that we consider the most important. Freedom. The world was not free. 250 years ago was more or less when the United States became the first democracy. Whatever your opinion is about America, but it was technically the first democracy. Only 250 years ago. That's a very short period of time. Most models of democracy today are all within the last few centuries. What ruled the world before that? Monarchs, fascists, the church, totalitarian regimes that were controlled by one person. If they happened to be benevolent, we were lucky, but very often they weren't. These values the Jewish people were cherishing from the beginning of time. You go back thousands of years, like I said right now about the soul, that every human being has a unique soul. And I say every human being, I mean 8 billion people on this planet. Imagine if all of us from our childhood was taught that. Wouldn't that be one of the best ways to preempt wars and conflicts? I'm not being naive, I understand it's not so simple. But it's not something that we even learn about. The sanctity of life, the value of life, the most important message of all. Because if you don't think your life is valuable and indispensable, how indispensable can your choices be? So this, I've just given you a mini Rosh Hashanah sermon. And frankly, I could have not even used the word Rosh Hashanah. And sometimes I have to do that because I speak to some audiences, as soon as you use a Hebrew word or religious word is a turnoff. So sometimes you speak secular language, but I'll just share a story about that. Years ago, when I began my career, so to speak, if you call this a career, I was giving classes, which I still do online today, but I was giving a class in first in my home and then in Manhattan. And it was for people from the arts and entertainment industry. And these were Jews and non-Jews, but people very spiritual, creative, artistic, however, not traditional in any way. No, many of them would say that their connection to the spirituality came from LSD and from Zen Buddhism. And here was I sitting there, a traditional Jew. So we had again these interactions. I remember thinking, the art of communication, you always want to communicate with people. And the secret to communication is to get through stereotypes. Everybody stereotypes. Like, I stand here with a beard and a yarmulke. I fit into some box that you may have in your mind. Not necessarily maliciously. So I was thinking to myself, even before I open my mouth, there are people who never met a Jew like me. And they may put me into that same category of maybe some rabbi that cheated them in business, or some irrelevant Hebrew school teacher that taught them hollow Torah lessons, or maybe war memories. So I decided to do an experiment, not to use any religious or Jewish words in my conversation. I created my own language. Instead of God, I used words like higher reality, the essence of it all. If it was a particularly New Age group, I used words like undefined, indeterministic layers of energy. Instead of Torah, I used the word blueprint. Instead of mitzvot, I used connections. And instead of Mashiach and Geula, I used the word destination. And here I was waxing eloquent about reaching the essence of all reality, getting beyond the sensory to reach the suprasensory, and channeling all by following a blueprint, making the connection between the outer and the inner, fusing matter and energy, form and function, until we experience a seamless connection and integration between all levels of reality. And I remember the people were listening, they loved it. It was great. I was enjoying myself. Everything I was saying was coming straight from Hebrew sources, but I never used the Hebrew word. I never used the religious word. It was completely secular. And it worked better than I expected. After a few months, or I remember how long, a few weeks it may have been, I don't remember now, a guy came over to me. His name was Kenny Vance. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember, there was one of the rock bands in the United States called Jay and the Americans. You all look so young to me, I don't even know if you know this group, okay? But Jay and the Americans in the 60s. And he comes over to me before one of the classes, and he says to me quietly, he says to me, you know, everybody loves what you're teaching. Are you talking about God? So I said, yes, but shh. Don't spoil it for the others, you know? And I realized how much words, language, we're taught that language connects us. And it's true. Today, especially in the world of therapy, speak up. No one's going to guess. Your husband is not going to guess what you're feeling. You have to speak up, communicate. Sometimes we speak too much today. But you can't be silent. So there's truth to that. Communication is important, but sometimes communication could also separate us. Because I could use a word that's innocuous and meaningless to me, but when you hear it, it reminds you of some word that when your mother heard it, she went ballistic in your house. Because words are loaded. The word God. These three-letter word. Sounds so simple. I can assure you that if we handed out a note right here, a question to each of you, define God, I don't think two people will come up with the same answer. I'm not talking about the prerequisite first cause, creator, divine being. Personally, define God. Where do we learn about God? Which class exactly in school or university taught us about God? I'm not talking about theological theories of others. So we picked it up either at home, or from the street, or from social media, or from people who are, we're called enlightened, as I said before, therefore consider themselves non-believers, etc. We all have our stereotypes. So this experiment, what it really taught me, what I'm sharing is that language is critical. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Later I began to talk openly about God. I had no problem talking about it. I just did not want it to be a block. Looks like my picture, if it would have been on the cover of the book, I am sure you that many people would just not buy the book. Because another rabbi, another guy. So when it comes to this season especially, it's critical to get beyond those stereotypes. And I say this even to those that are here, including myself, that have grown up with it. You could think I'm speaking only to those that don't know what Rosh Hashanah is, but even those of us that do know, as I alluded to earlier, it can become very robotic and mechanical, and therefore it loses its passion. Everything is like that. A marriage is like that. If you let it get into automatic pilot, it will stagnate. If you're not busy being born, you're busy dying. That's how it works in all of life, and especially in matters of faith and soul. If it becomes too mechanical, it may be better than nothing, but it's not If your spouse tells you or your loved one tells you, I love you, and you feel it's hollow, they're just saying it because they want a favor from you or something. I love you requires work. You have to think about it and you have to renew it. So here we are in this month, as I said, Elul. And may also surprise some of you that Elul, and I say this even to people who grew up with it, Elul is called a month of love. Actually, the Hebrew word Elul is an acronym for 4 letters, which is a verse from the book of Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs. Ani l'dodi v'dodi li. I am to my beloved, and my beloved is to me. What a beautiful statement. Tells you the secret of a relationship. It's reciprocal. It's not a one-way street. Initiate. You have to initiate. Ani l'dodi. You don't wait for your beloved to speak to you. You initiate. How many of us are playing that game? I'll initiate if you initiate, and then where do you go? And many other messages. So when you dig deeper into these ancient traditions, you find tremendous wealth and relevance. It's not like some people think archaic, primitive, old ideas. Yes, it comes from a long time ago. But you know what? The most powerful things in life are actually not original. The truest truisms, you think people that lived 3,000 years ago didn't want love in their lives? Didn't look for wisdom? Didn't try to find the things that make them happy? Yeah, they may have had other opportunities, a different world. Like that professor who spent half his life writing a paper, and then he presented it to the wizards of the world, and they looked at it, and they came back unanimously saying, your paper is both good and original. So he was so touched, good and original, wow. They said one problem, the part that's good is not original, and the part that's original is not good. You understand? The deepest truths are the ones that are not necessarily the ones you innovate. When someone says, that's a truth that you just said, that resonates with me, I always knew it, but I didn't know how to articulate it, that's the greatest statement of a true idea. It's not the ideas that I share with you or you share with me. We're all channeling higher truths. So with that, when you look at then through that lens on this period in time, it takes on a whole different dimension. Not only does it become relevant, it becomes indispensable. When I started appreciating these traditions in that spiritual context, I realized you have all the secrets to life. I spoke before about the human being, the very soul that we are, the Rosh Hashanah message. Let's talk about the Yom Kippur message for a moment. So what's Yom Kippur? What's the universal message that every person can value? So you ask anyone that knows a little about Yom Kippur, well, Yom Kippur is a day, some know it's a fast day, you fast all day. Starting from the evening, so it's not an easy day, you're going to be hungry. Another, it's a day of prayer. In synagogues, they pray a big part of the day, if not the entire day. And it's true, there's a rush to synagogues, more people go to Yom Kippur services than anywhere. Whether it's out of guilt or that Jewish conscience, I'm not sure what it is, but there's something. But what is its relevant message? So let me share this with you. This I remember speaking for a conference in America. It was the United States of American Psychiatric Association. They had semi-conferences for psychiatrists and psychologists, people in the recovery world, healing world. And there was a person I knew there, and he felt it would be good for me to share a Jewish perspective on recovery, on healing. So I shared the Yom Kippur message. I didn't say it was Yom Kippur till the end of my talk for the reasons I mentioned, because I didn't want anyone to walk out. So I said the following. I said, what is the heart and soul? What lies at the essence of all healing? You're all healers. Some of you through therapy, some through medication. I'm not going to get into how many of are good and not good. But bottom line is, what lies at the heart when you have a client, someone that's suffering from anxiety, from trauma, addictions, whether clinical or not clinical. So, not to be oversimplistic, one of the key things is that the person who's been hurt or is trying to heal or grow should have confidence in the healing process, that they can actually heal. One of the worst possible, the greatest challenge is not just the damage that was done, but we feel we're damaged goods. We feel it's too late for me. We give up on ourselves. There's no one that has no hope that's going to heal. It's critical. Like if you have, God forbid, somebody's lying in a hospital and they have no guests, no visitors, no gifts, no one comes to care for them. You think that doesn't affect their healing process? Of course it does. And then you have someone who has family and friends and gifts. And first of all, it just creates a sense of strength. Your immune system gets stronger. You could ask any doctor, whether it's psychosomatic, whatever you want to call it. But the bottom line is there's something that happens when you have people who support you. It's just like you see fans in sports. Fans give strength to an athlete. There's something about that we can give synergy, that we give strength to each other. In other words, the fact is when a person feels there's hope, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is not the light of the oncoming train, that gives a person, the confidence we can get through it. So a healer, one of the most important things is to share with someone that you're not damaged goods. Yes, you may have lost something in your life. You may have been hurt, you may have been abused, maybe even horrible things. People have tremendous losses. People lose parents at a young age, mental health issues, others. I don't want to go through all the nightmares. The most important thing is to tell the person you have a part of you that if you can access that is more powerful than everything that has happened to you. To put it in different words, that if you may have suffered, but you're not a sufferer. You're not defined by your losses. You're not defined by your injuries, by your wounds. You may have a wound, and we're not denying that, but that's not you're not a wounded person. You're a person that has wounds. And then I said, this message is the secret, firstly, to Jewish survival. The Jewish people have suffered perhaps more than any other people. Why are they still here? Against all odds. When the obituaries have been written, not just after the Holocaust, after we were in Egypt thousands of years ago, after the Babylonians destroyed the first temple and the Romans the second temple, and the list goes on, because the Jews had developed a resilience that was based on a faith that was stronger than their wounds. They would not allow their enemies to define them. So they suffered, but they were not defined by that. They were defined by their faith, by their beliefs, by their souls. And then I shared, at the end of my talk, I said, that's why Yom Kippur is the holiest day of the year. Because on that day, historically, you read the biblical story, is the day that gave birth to the hope and of forgiveness. That even though the Jewish people had transgressed and they built a golden calf, they betrayed God, literally like infidelity, and God gave up on them. He said, I don't have a partner. Yet, they were able to dig deeper, and Moses, the great Moses, would not take no for an answer from God. He broke down the walls and the doors, and he gained the single most important thing. I've counseled many couples. Unfortunately, sometimes there's an infidelity, which of course breaches trust. And once trust is gone, how could you have a relationship? How do you know you're not going to do it again? That's like the big question. No matter the promises made and so on. Yeah, the promise is made until because you want to get something from me. So how do you can you reconcile? Can you reconcile a couple where one has betrayed the other? And this is also true between friends, business partners. I mean, across the board, across the spectrum, this is a big question. And Yom Kippur's answer is a resolute answer is yes. But there's a condition. No, it's not just enough to say, I'm sorry and let's move on. It doesn't work that way. If you did something really wrong, you're going to need to really regain trust. But the key word is this: trust is not built on perfection, it's built on accountability. What Moses said to God was, the people did a big mistake, and I'm not giving excuses. And they have to repent and they need to atone for it. But they're human beings. All human beings are going to make mistakes. And if they're accountable, then you can trust them. That means, yes, I did something wrong. You know, the worst thing they say in psychology, they say the rape, the silence is worse than the rape. It's not the crime. The crime is terrible. But the silence afterwards, the denial, nothing happened. Nothing happened. Or it's your fault, or it's someone else's fault. That's far worse, because then there's no room for health, for healing. At least someone says, yes, the terrible thing happened, and now we're going to repair it. This is the essential message of Yom Kippur. And again, I don't know, I mean, it's sad to say this, but I don't know how many people really know this. I'm not here to tell you that I'm the only one that knows it. I'm not taking it from my own ideas. You just go back to the original and you discover this. So again, an indispensable message that every one of us can learn from. I can assure you, no matter who you are, and even if you're an atheist and don't believe in anything, this message is a critical one for all of us. And then finally, let's go to the last of the 3 steps in the high holidays, is Sukkot. It's called Zman Simchaseinu, time of rejoicing, celebration, the power of joy. So there's the classic line where people say, if things were going well in my life, I'd be happy. And the answer that some of the mystics give, if you were happy, things would be going well in your life. In other words, it's the difference between speaking like a victim or speaking like a leader. A victim says, hey, things happen to me, what am I going to do? You throw up your hands. You know, what's going to be? A leader never says that. A leader says, what am I going to do about it? What is the difference between a good swimmer and a bad swimmer? They're both swimming in the water. If it's calm waters, you may not see the difference. Then suddenly a storm strikes, and then you see the difference. A bad swimmer will fight the tide, they'll get exhausted, and who knows what will happen. A good swimmer is not going to fight the tide. A good swimmer knows how to navigate. It's not because the good swimmer is so powerful. He knows that if it's a storm, maybe now is not the time to try to fight the waves. Let me float until I can begin to swim again. It's about navigating the waves and vicissitudes of life. That's the key. So when someone says, yeah, I know why this guy's life is so well, because he never had challenges, nothing happened to him. If he had what happened to me, he wouldn't be so. That's not correct. First of all, we don't judge others. You don't know what people have gone through. It's all about navigating. You look at anyone that has really gone through terrible losses in life, real tragedies, and you'll always see the ones that have risen are the ones that knew how to navigate. Not because they didn't suffer. They learned how to navigate. And simcha, joy, is a critical piece of it. You could say, how could you be happy if I just had a tragedy? Because happiness is not the opposite of a tragedy. Happiness is not, we're not talking about frivolous celebration, you're running to go into a party just to dance. Joy means that you have a connection to an inner part of yourself, that even when things may not go well, there's something you can turn to. It could be your faith, it could be your love, it could be your connections. It gives you more resources. And in the investments, they say diversify. You put all your eggs in one basket. When that basket is taken, then you feel completely at loss. One of the great Hasidic Rebbes was arrested by the Soviets at the time of Stalin. It wasn't good times. And he refused to cooperate. And these were talking about people who were, they could shoot him in a second. There was no due process. And one of them, actually a Jew, he was a Jewish communist, the biggest anti-Semite of them all. There's nothing like a Jewish anti-Semite, just for the record. And he pointed a gun to the Rebbe's head and said to him, Rebbe, this revolver, this gun has changed many people's minds. It's time to begin to cooperate. And the Rebbe looked at him unfazed and said, this toy, that's what he called it in Yiddish, tzatske. He said, this toy can intimidate, can frighten someone that has one world and many gods, but not someone that has one God and many worlds. Now, not that the Rebbe was saying that I'm happy to die, but you're not going to frighten me because my life doesn't end just because you shoot. I have many baskets. I've diversified my life. Joy is part of connecting to something that is eternal in us. So no matter what happens, you have that deeper level of simcha. And it's not just a joy, it's a joy of life. You know, you ever see people with a sparkle in their eyes? And then you find out their life was not so easy. Where do they get the sparkle from? Because they're connected to something that's greater than their own ego and their own selves. If your life is driven by ego, so if things are going well, you'll be happy. If things are not going well, you're going to be devastated. But if your life is driven by a purpose and cause beyond yourself, then you always have some joy in your life. It may not be able to celebrate in the most apparent way, but there's an inner simcha within us. So these are just three universal psychological and spiritual and emotional lessons that come from this period of time. I would like to say that I wish every Jewish child, for that matter, every child on earth, would learn these messages at the youngest of age. You tell me how many problems it would preempt. Knowing that you are an indispensable soul in this world with a unique mission that you and only you can accomplish. Something every parent should be telling their child every morning and every evening. Or even more than that, more often. To know the second thing is that even when we make mistakes, no matter what happens in life, there's a part of you that is never broken. You have to access it. There's always hope, there's always forgiveness, there's always repair, there's always healing. And finally, that we have reservoirs of joy within us that we may not be aware of, because our lives are not just defined by our circumstances, but they're defined by a higher purpose, higher connection. And this is a big part of why I wrote 60 Days and why I'm here this evening. It's really a miracle what Tamara pulled off, to be honest. As we discussed in our office, we didn't believe it was going to happen. Now we didn't believe in her. Once you meet her, you realize that there's no relentless. But the fact is, and I speak now personally, there's nothing more gratifying when you write a book. Not just someone compliments you, they read the book, it's a nice book, but you see that it empowers them to become a leader in their own right. You know, I don't feel it's my book, to be honest, because a good author, a good speaker knows, as I mentioned before, we are channels of truths that are greater than ourselves. That's the fact. We are all distributors. And the ultimate compliment is not that you shared a brilliant idea. The ultimate compliment, you shared an idea that resonated like a song. When you sing a song, it resonates in our hearts and souls. And I feel, especially in our day and age, there's so many problems in the world, so much polarization. And I come from the United States, I could tell you, I've never seen it so bad in the context of the media. I mean, it's like the blind leading the blind. It's beyond tragic in many ways. You know, there's a lot of beautiful things in life today. I'm not taking for granted our blessings. But you talk about a moral vision, a moral compass. People, tell me the last time you heard a visionary speech by any leader on earth. It doesn't exist even. Not even expecting it. It's all a bunch of gladiators looking for blood without any direction. And really, it's completely can be quite depressing. The reason I'm not depressed is because, as I said, I hold on to 3,500 years, and I look at the United States as a country that's 250 years old and still has to grow up. You know, some of its values are very powerful, but there's many problems. As a Jew, and I think as a human being, look what's going on in the Middle East, Israel. But I take strength, and I wish I could also convey to you to take strength from this period in time. Because really the ultimate message of this month, Elul and Tishrei, is that we are indestructible when we hold on to the values that are eternal. And Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Torah, which by the way, it's actually quite important, will be the first anniversary of October 7th. The world calls it October 7th. The Jewish people know it as Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah. That when Hamas entered and massacred in the brutal fashion, the atrocities, that morning, it was Shmini Atzeret and Simchat Torah in Israel. That's what it was. And when all of us remember exactly where we were that morning, it was Shabbat morning. I don't think anyone will ever forget when the news started filtering in. got from bad to worse. And here we still are, look what's going on. The latest news with the hostages, etc. And they're right now hostages, babies, an 18-month-old baby, come on. A 4-year-old child, now they're a little older. And you don't hear much outrage about it. Blame Israel for that. So the strength we get, that we've been here before. It's not minimizing, I want to make sure that's clear. We're not minimizing what's going on. But we shall prevail. There's no question in my mind. But I believe, and I want to leave you with this, is that each of us is either part of the problem or part of the solution. It's not their problem. As a Jew, I will say, we're one nation, and like an organism in a body, if one part of the body is stronger, the rest of the body is stronger. But as a human being as well, the human race is also one organism. It's a myth to think that if one person is suffering, it's their problem, not ours. Yeah, we can have that delusion, like that joke they tell about, they talk about survival of the fittest. But these two guys that go camping, middle of the night, one of them wakes up and he hears a bear scurrying about. A bear. And he wakes up his friend and says, we got to get out of here, there's a bear here. And while he's telling him that, he says, he's tying his sneakers. Quickly he's tying his sneakers. And his friend says to him, what do you think, you can outrun the bear? He says, no, all I have to do is outrun you. This is called dog eats dog, survival of the fittest. But our message to each other is the exact opposite. We're all part of one world, one human race, one Jewish people. So when we stand in a month like this of love, we're part of the war. Our part of the war may not be the physical part. We're not standing with ammunition and artillery and fighting the battles. There are people sacrificing their lives doing that. But we are part of the spiritual war. We, the Jewish people, have always known that every war is fought on both ends. And one cannot work without the other. The morale, the spirit, is just as important as your firepower. And that's something in all our hands. So I think this year especially, as we come closer to October 7th, and we go into this season, more than ever, there's a sense of urgency that we have to feel like soldiers. People criticize the world for being silent during the Holocaust. And many of us think, how could you have been silent? You heard millions of people, little children were being gassed. Well, now we are the people. Are we silent? Morally and spiritually. And we have to be able to say, generations that will come after us, that we were not silent, that we stood up, that in a time like this, we sharpened and crystallized our moral vision, our commitment to what is good, and shared it with others, and did not allow false narratives and propaganda to dominate. I'm not suggesting that everything Israel does is perfect. That's not my point here. My point is, however, there is right or wrong. And as Churchill said famously, appeasement is like feeding the crocodiles in the hope you'll be eaten last. So here's not a place to go into the whole picture of it, but I want to just conclude with this. That my father was a journalist. He used to tell me there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people who ask what happened. Okay. I would like to say that I think that every one of us who's a little conscientious and sensitive really should be in the first category. We have to be people who make things happen. Not just standing on the sidelines watching others, watch others, and definitely not asking what happened. We need to be proactive. That's what a true human being is. That's what a true soul is. So if I were to sum up the message of Elul and Tishrei, the 60 days, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, is the empowerment of the human being as a divine agent in this world for goodness and kindness. That doesn't mean we're naive, we look the other way. When we have to fight our battles, we fight our battles. But above all, victory is not about eliminating the enemy. It's about transforming this world, in the words of this Isaiah the prophet, that there'll be no more evil and no more destruction on this earth, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. So I, for one, have committed my life, and I hope all of you feel the same about yourselves, to not be part of the problem and be part of the solution. And that means taking proactive actions and influencing others. And yes, no problem calling out, reaching out to people, whether it's through social media, online, or in person, and encouraging others. That's the ultimate butterfly effect in scientific language, a ripple effect, where each of us, there's only 5 degrees of separation between human beings. Imagine if each one of you reached out to 10 people and shared with them a message, a kind message, a soulful message, an empowering message of what, some of what we spoke about what a soul is about, your unique mission, and so on. You can change the world. So I want to wish everyone, this is a time where we wish each other, all of us, the birth of the human race is Rosh Hashanah, Hashanah Tovah, a blessed year, a year a lot better than the previous one, materially and spiritually, with much joy and health and peace for all people on earth, especially protecting the innocent people in Israel, soldiers, the innocent people sacrificing their lives for others. Much nachas and joy from our families and your children, and all again in the best of health, and may we merit to experience together both personal and global redemption. Thank you so much.
Solamente quiero realmente agradecer al Rab, la verdad, por su tan importante mensaje, y en esta noche es cuando realmente está comenzando el mes de Elul. Esta noche es el segundo día de Rosh Chodesh. Ya saben que cuando hay 2 días, ayer o hoy en la mañana fue el día 30 de Av, y ahorita es el primero de Elul. Entonces yo creo que es increíble que ahorita reciban este libro, que son estos 60 días, porque tenemos que hacer algo. ¿Y cómo logramos hacer algo? Es sabido el dicho, que más bien las iniciales de Elul, que indican Ani le dodi bedodili, yo me acerco a Dios y Dios me corresponde, se acerca a mí, pero tenemos que hacer esa parte nuestra. Y esa es una oportunidad. Progresivamente, cada día una reflexión. No podemos cambiar de la noche a la mañana, pero justamente estos 60 días que van ascendiendo, cada día uno lee una hoja del libro de ese día, una reflexión, un detalle, una superación, llegar hasta Simchat Torah todos estos días, llegar al nivel superior, que es Simchat Torah, que es alegrarse, llegar a encontrar la felicidad interna a través justamente de esa superación personal, esa espiritualidad. Por eso muy apropiado, de verdad, un libro bien pensado, que para cada día algo tenemos que hacer, algo tenemos que reflexionar, vamos a cumplir realmente la misión. Really, I want to thank you for your presence, for you be here, and it's an honor for us, you exacting words that you said. I hope everyone receive, and the important for this book that you present. Muchas gracias y buenas noches.